All right, Chapter 9, the critical risks and offering plans section of Business Plans That Work by Jeffrey A. Timmons, Andrew Zacharakis, and Stephen Spinelli. So let's get started. The critical risks and offering plans sections. Critical risks. Understanding the critical drivers of your success. Every new venture faces a number of risks that may threaten its survival. Although the business plan has been creating a story of success, there are a number of threats that readers will identify and recognize. The plan needs to acknowledge these potential risks, otherwise investors will believe that the entrepreneur is naive or untrustworthy and may withhold investment. It is also important for you to understand these critical risks because they often are directly related to assumptions that will drive your venture success or failure. For example, a common critical risk is market acceptance. Will your target customers buy your product in the quantity and price you expect? If they do, your top-line revenue projections probably will hold true, but if they do not, your business could be in serious trouble. How should you present these critical risks without scaring your investors, or for that matter, so that you feel comfortable proceeding with your venture? Identify the risk and then state your contingency plan. For instance, if your primary target customer doesn't buy your product as expected, a contingency might be to redirect your efforts to a new target customer group. Critical assumptions vary from one company to another, but some common categories are market interest and growth potential, competitor actions and retaliation, time and cost of development, operating expenses, and availability and timing of financing. We will highlight these major categories briefly, but don't limit your thinking to these categories. Try to anticipate what else might be important for your company. Market interest and growth potential. The biggest risk any new venture faces is that once the product is developed, no one will buy it. Although a number of things can be done to minimize this risk, such as market research, focus groups, and beta sites, it is difficult to gauge overall demand and growth of the demand until your product hits the market. This risk must be stated but countered with the tactics and contingencies the company will undertake if problems develop. For example, sales risks can be reduced by instituting an effective advertising and marketing plan, or by identifying not only a primary target customer but also secondary and tertiary target customers that the company will seek if the primary customer proves not to be interested. Perhaps the most effective method of countering this risk is to test the market in a series of iterations. Thus, many technology companies go through alpha and beta testing. Basically, alpha testing involves having your employees and friends test the product. They report back and you make modifications so that the product better meets their needs. Next, you might move the product to beta sites. A beta site is a handful of selected customers who understand that the product is in an early stage and that there may be glitches, yet are excited by the product's potential. Usually you can get these customers to pay a minimal price for the product, but sometimes you let them use it for free. After you make adjustments during the beta stage, you start a controlled rollout to the broader market. Try to have feedback loops where you can learn from the customers and make changes so that the product is better in the next version. Although this strategy is associated with technology projects such as software, it can work with all businesses. Firefly, for example, produced a prototype of its first comfort creature and then distributed it to a few childcare professionals. Lauren then observed the professionals and children playing with the toy and, based on feedback, made adjustments. In the next phase, Lauren donated a few toys to a charitable event and followed up with the people who used the product to make it better. She also sold a few toys to friends and close advisors, including one of the authors, and asked them to provide feedback on how their children used the product. At the time when this current business plan is written, Firefly has done only a limited run of 500 comfort creatures and comfort kits. Based on the reaction from the selling this first production run, Lauren will make adjustments before producing a larger run. The key is to have several iterations where you can test and then adjust the product offering so that it better meets the customer's needs. This strategy minimizes the risk of misreading the customer. You'll also note that you have reduced resource outlays by using a control strategy. The cost of producing 500 comfort creatures is lower than that of a larger production run, and if customers don't like the product, you will have saved the difference in cost between a smaller and a larger production batch. Often this can be the difference between surviving and failing. If you blow all your resources on a large production run that fails, you may not get a second chance. In contrast, conserving your resources on a smaller test run should preserve enough resources to make changes and try again. Competitor actions and retaliation. Having had the opportunity to work with entrepreneurs and student entrepreneurs over the years, we have been struck by the firmly held belief either that direct competition didn't exist or that it was sleepy and slow to react. There have been many cases where this indeed has been true, but we caution against using it as a key assumption in your venture success. Most entrepreneurs passionately believe that they are offering something new and wonderful that is clearly different from what is being offered currently. They go on to state that the existing competition won't attack their niche in the near future, often because the competition is a large company concerned only with a larger market. The implicit assumption is that your smaller niche isn't interesting to the competition because the potential profitability of the niche is lower than that of the broader market. The risk that this assessment is wrong should be acknowledged. One counter to this threat is that your venture has room in its gross margins and cash available to withstand and fight back against such attacks. You also should identify some strategies to protect and reposition yourself in the case such an attack occurs. Time and cost of development. As mentioned in the development plan section, many factors can delay and add to the expense of developing your product. The business plan should identify the factors that may hinder development. For instance, during the extended high-tech boom of the late 1990s, there was an acute shortage of skilled software engineers that led to the risk of hiring and retaining the most qualified professionals. One way to counter the problem might be to outsource some development to the underemployed engineers in India. Compensation, equity participation, flexible hours, and other benefits that the firm could offer also might minimize the risk. Operating expenses. Operating expenses have a way of growing beyond expectations. Sales and administration, marketing, and interest expenses are some of the areas an entrepreneur needs to monitor and manage. The business plan should highlight how these expenses were forecast, comparable companies, and detailed analysis, but also talk about contingencies such as slowing the hiring of support personnel, especially if development or other key tasks take longer than expected. Availability and timing of the financing. We can't stress enough how important cash flow is to the survival and flourishing of a new venture. One major risk that the most new ventures face is that they have difficulty obtaining needed financing, both equity and debt. If the current business plan is meant to attract investors and is successful, that isn't a near-term risk, but most ventures will need follow-on financing. If the firm fails to make progress or meet key milestones, it may not be able to secure additional financing on favorable terms. A counter to this risk is to identify alternative sources that are viable or strategies to slow down the burn rate. A number of other risks might apply to your business. Acknowledge them and discuss how you can overcome them. Doing so generates confidence in your investors. Firefly's critical risk section. Okay, so critical risks 9.1 market risks, market interest and growth potential. The product is not sufficiently differentiated from a teddy bear product in the eyes of the caregivers. Firefly's product line includes plush animals kits with special stories and activities addressing different life challenges and guides for caregivers who are helping children manage these challenges. The company believes this differentiates our products from teddy bears. Firefly also recognizes that caregivers respond best to touching and experiencing new products and enjoy finding new tools to take into the classroom and offer to parents. Firefly will work with caregivers through the website and Salesforce and at conferences to educate them on how to use the comfort creatures effectively and creatively. These demonstrations will clarify the product's uniqueness. Distribution risk. Unique distribution channels will not prove successful. The therapeutic toys Firefly makes are well suited to unique distribution through philanthropic organizations, hospitals, and schools. The company has tested the concept through its advisors and discussions with various organizations. Feedback suggests that these channels are interested and willing to deliver Firefly's unique tools to caregivers. In case these channels don't prove out, the company also is developing the specialty toy store channel. Time and cost of development risk. There are risks to outsourcing manufacturing. Since the control of the manufacturing is ultimately not within the company's control, it is inherent risk. The initial production of 500 comfort creatures and comfort kits suggests that the company has found a reliable partner in the Five of Us Firefly. Also is developing contingency relationships in case unforeseen problems arise. So for each risk, there's a response, right? So in this risk, we are looking at alternative sources. Intellectual property risk. Competitors could mimic the product. The product will be protected through trademarks and copyrights. The concept and storyline for the creatures and the guidelines for the caregivers will be protected by copyright. So the response here is to use as much legal protection as possible. So critical risk summary. As you review Firefly's critical risk section, note that Lauren raises the risk and then discusses how the company is managing it. What other risks do you think Lauren has overlooked? Do you believe she has countered those risks adequately? What other contingencies might improve her chances of success if some of these risks come into play? The key is to anticipate what might happen and prepare to manage those risks if they arise. Okay, offering plan. How much do you need? As we stated in Chapter 1, one of the main reasons to write a business plan is to seek and secure financing. It is important for entrepreneurs to identify not only how much capital they are seeking, but also how they will use that funding to achieve milestones. A sources and uses table articulates your needs effectively. The sources section details how much capital the entrepreneur needs and the type of financing, such as equity, investment, and debt infusions. The uses section details how the money will then be spent. Typically, the entrepreneur should secure enough financing to last 12 to 18 months. Taking more capital means that the entrepreneur gives up more equity. In other words, taking more capital than you need dilutes your ownership share. Taking less means that the entrepreneur may run out of cash before reaching the milestones that equate to higher valuations. It is important to think of financing as happening over time. You want to raise enough capital during each stage to reach a critical milestone and then raise additional capital to hit the next milestone. This financing strategy preserves your equity because you give up equity based on the perceived value of the company at the time of financing. When you're starting out, you may only have a concept, not a product. The value of that concept and therefore the company is relatively lower than the value will be when you have a physical product that is the manifestation of the concept. Likewise, a company that has the physical product but few or no sales is valued then less than is a company that has sales. If at a time you start your company you have raised it all the capital you need to penetrate the market and reach a certain sales level, cash flow positive, you probably will have to give away most of the equity because the value of the company is so low in the beginning. In contrast, if you manage the financing over time, you will give up less equity in total. A question that most entrepreneurs have difficulty answering is how much of the company they must give to investors at each stage of the financing, or what the company's valuation is. The reality is that valuation is always a matter of negotiation between you and your investors. With that understanding, a company's valuation is based on what it has accomplished to date, said differently, what milestones it has accomplished and achieved. A company that is pre-launch, just a concept, is worth very little. Developing a product increases the value. Achieving sales increases the value further. So how might you gauge the value of your company at this stage? One technique that is relatively simple and robust is the venture capital technique. Don't worry, you do not need to be seeking venture capital to use it. The technique basically looks at what return an investor needs to achieve and then looks at the company's potential to generate that return. For example, we see from Firefly's business plan that the company is seeking $320,000. Since the company has a product and limited sales, investors will gauge the likelihood that they will get their investment back plus an attractive rate of return. The rate of return an investor might expect would be around 50% per year. Why? The chances are still great that the venture will fail, and so investors need a premium return, or they will invest elsewhere. When an investor puts money into a startup firm, that firm is privately held. That means there's no market for investors to sell their shares. Thus, investors expect to hold their shares for many years until the company, A, goes public, or B, is acquired by another firm. For example, American Girl was acquired by Mattel, or C, generates enough cash flow and profit to buy back the investors' shares. Let's assume that the investors expect to get their money out of the company in 5 years. That means that investments I is $320,000. Length of investment is 5 years. Expected rate of return ROR is 50%. We are seeking the future value of the investment. Okay, so $320,000 principal investment for 5 years, and 50% return is expected, rate of return. So we want to now know what is the future value of this investment. So the future value is the initial investment times 1 plus rate of return to the nth power. So in this case, it becomes $320,000 times 1.5 to the 5th power. So that is $2.43 million. So okay, so this expected rate of return is actually basically the yearly rate of return then, right? Because we are adding it to 1 and raising it to the 5th power for 5 years. Okay. Now that we know the future value of the investment, we need to determine the future value of the company. We need to estimate the company's profit after tax in the future and then multiply that figure by a price to earnings ratio. So in this case, I'm using the projections that Firefly presents in its plan for year 5. So Firefly's profit after tax in year 5 is $4.6 million. Consumer durables price earning ratio, PE ratio, is 15. So the profit after tax of $4.6 million times the price to earning ratio of 15 gives us a $69 million future valuation. So the final step is to divide that future valuation of the investment by the future valuation of the company. So what we're basically doing is determining what percentage of the company the investors need to own so that they can earn their expected rate of return. So in this case, they're putting in $320,000, which after 5 years will be worth $2.4 million, and the company will be worth $69 million after 5 years. So after 5 years, they should have 3.5% of the equity. So as investors, we are always skeptical about an entrepreneur's projections. Entrepreneurs tend to be overly optimistic. Thus, you need to be careful when going through this exercise so that you will not be surprised if an investor has a significantly different estimate. There are several assumptions that can be widely off. Based on our extensive experience, for instance, we would demand 20% of Firefly's equity. That percentage suggests that Firefly is worth roughly $1.5 million before the investment. Divide $320,000 by 20%. We are in essence questioning the accuracy of Lauren's financial projections. As we discussed in earlier chapters, we believe she is underestimating her employee expenses. Thus, we expect her to have higher operating expenses, which equates to lower profits and lower valuation over time. Even though we recommend that you have some basis for determining how much equity you need to give to secure investments, we do not suggest that you present that in the business plan. This gets back to our opening statement that valuation is a negotiation. Thus, putting in how much you are willing to give might end the negotiation before it starts. If, for instance, we saw that Firefly wants to relinquish only 3.4% of its equity for my $320,000, we probably would not consider the investment. Nonetheless, it's important to go through this exercise so that you're operating from a position of knowledge when you negotiate with investors. Thus, the offering section is often very short, possibly consisting only a sources and uses table with some description around it. Firefly's offering plan 10.0, the offering. As Table 10.1 demonstrates, Firefly Toys is seeking $320,000 to reach month 13 when the company begins to generate a continuous positive cash flow. Here's the sources and uses schedule. $320,000 in angel funding will be used for $20,000 for web development and maintenance, $115,600 for advertising and promotion, $245,000 for headcount, and $50,000 for cost of goods sold. And that adds up to 320. Adds up to more. I think something is wrong with the math in the book here, because 245, 20 plus 115 plus 245 plus 50 is well over 320. Okay, so the math here is incorrect in the book, but the idea is still correct, that you are saying how much money you are raising and how much money will be used in what ways. So sources and uses. Notice that the Firefly is seeking equity only from angels in this round. It is difficult for new ventures with few or no assets to secure debt. The uses illustrates how the funds will be spent. And I'm just kind of curious, what is their actual number adding up to? 245 plus 70 is 315, and then 415, so it's about 430,600 that they're trying to raise. Anyway, chapter summary. In this chapter, we have focused on the critical assumptions that drive a venture's success and also the offering plan. Both elements are influenced by your pro forma projections. Your critical assumptions often are directly related to the revenue and cost projections that we will see on your income statement. Your offerings valuation also is derived from your income statement projections. Chapter 10 will examine how to develop sound financial projections. And that is the end of chapter 9, the critical risks and offering plan sections. And in the next section, chapter 10, we will discuss the financial plan, telling your story in numbers. I'm Aditya Mittal. I hope you have enjoyed this video on business plans that work. I will see you in the next video.